Welcome to another episode of Scottish Murders. This is part 2 of the George Murdoch Unsolved Murder Revisited. In part 1, we heard from George's nephew Alec and Alec's wife Robina, who have been behind a campaign to keep the details of George's murder in the public eye, in the hope that one day someone who holds the key to who George's murderer is comes forward. We also heard from Ryan, the host of the 5-part episode podcast, who is the Cheesewire Killer, who spoke to Alec and Robina for his podcast, as well as the lead detective working on George's case, a forensic psychologist, and the next-door neighbour of George and his wife Jessie at the time of his murder, 13-year-old David, who saw George as his second grandfather. And we heard about 2 huge updates that happened in George's murder case. In part 2, we will hear again from Alec, Robina and Ryan, and we'll hear about 2 further significant updates in this case. But first, I spoke to Ryan about how pleased I was that his podcast, Who is the Cheesewire Killer, had been shortlisted and commended at the UK True Crime Awards. So much goes into putting a single podcast episode together, but Ryan did an exceptional job on this 5-part episode series, and he deserved the commendations. However, Ryan had another surprise for me. I wanted to congratulate you because your podcast, it was shortlisted at the UK True Crime Awards, wasn't it?
It was.
That was amazing. I was so happy for you.
Thank you. It was highly commended by the judges. And do you know what? It was such a lot of work. I don't think anybody appreciates sometimes how much work a podcast can be to put together. And not just from the interviews to the research to the writing of it to the presenting of it, but even just after that, there was no point me doing all that work, and there's no point taking up the time of all the people that agreed to be interviewed without as many people hearing as possible. So we did a lot of basically just phoning up news agencies and radio and television. We got quite a lot of PR from it, which obviously helped to get more listeners. So yeah, so we were highly commended, and then last year we also won Best True Crime Podcast at the Independent Podcast Awards.
Oh, I didn't know that. I missed
did you
that.
not?
No, I didn't. Oh, congratulations. That's excellent. Oh, yes, show me.
I've got the award sitting on my desk, so yeah.
Oh, Ryan, I love it. That's really great. You should be very proud. I'm
very, very proud of the podcast. I'm so thankful to the individuals that were interviewed, tell George and Jess's story, how traumatic it was for them, and it was great to get recognition for it.
If you haven't listened to it, give it a listen.
Who is the Cheesewire Killer? Yeah, no, please do.
Okay, so before we hear about any further updates, we heard a lot in part 1 about how a former prisoner had got in touch with Robina and Alec through their Facebook page and gave them a really different perspective on George's killer. Before we hear from Robina and Alec about this, let me read parts of what this former prisoner had to say. You can read the full post from the 27th and 28th of February 2025 by visiting the George Murdoch Murder Appeal page on Facebook. The posts are titled Profile of a Killer. This man's belief is that George's killer was not a local crook and that it was not a robbery gone wrong. Instead, he said that this was a sadistic, sick killer who had plotted a murder or violent crime and made sure there were no witnesses because of his comeuppance if he got it wrong. Going on to say that this man is on the police computer somewhere and not for anything minor either. The former prisoner also believes that within hours or days, George's killer was out of the city, hence why there were no rumours or whispers. Going on to say that the reason I give thoughts to this brute not being local is because this city turns into a village when a crime like this occurs, and I never heard a whisper throughout the entire 80s, and that this is a human predator who calmly walks the streets with a cheese wire in his pocket, and that he is no stranger to extreme violence. He went on to state that, I speak from a position of being in that lifestyle for around 8 or 9 years. I have met and associated with this category of man, and a small number of them killed for no reason. Robina and Alec are so grateful for this ex-prisoner contacting them, And it was in his younger years, some 30 years ago, that this man found himself in prison. But he has since turned his life around, but vividly remembers his time rubbing shoulders with cold-blooded killers. And he felt compelled, after seeing the appeals for information to who George Murdoch's murderer could be, to contact Rubina and Alec and put his theory forward. Here's what Rubina and Alec had to say about this man coming forward, what him doing so led to, and just how thankful they are for everyone who likes, shares, and comments on their Facebook posts.
He'd thought about this for a couple of years coming forward, and I think he said that his wife sort of persuaded him, look, why don't you just try it? You never know where it might lead. So I appreciated his kindness and his compassion and sympathy in coming forward. So he deserved for this to be followed up, irrespective. But it just so happened that we actually agreed with him. So far, in this case, the local papers have been, so the P&G, Press and Journal, at the Evening Express, they have been absolutely incredible at the help they've given us. These were the papers of the Press and Journal who contributed £10,000 to the reward way back. I mean, you could have just knocked me over with a feather when they said that. So we have a very good relationship with them, extremely good. So they would be our first go-to paper, to take anything to, or if we wanted to ask if they would think such and such we took to them would be worth putting out there. And generally, they always agree. On this particular occasion, the guy who came forward, he says, have you managed to get anything out in the central belt? So Glasgow, Edinburgh, and even Dundee. It's not quite the central belt, but basically out with the Aberdeen area. And he was making a good point, because say somebody in Glasgow offends, an offender in Glasgow, they won't imprison them in a Glasgow prison. They'll send them elsewhere. Generally, they'll send them away from home. So his thought that this could be somebody out with the Aberdeen area, which is why he thought there were no whispers. I'd never heard any whispers in any pubs in Aberdeen, which is very unusual with a crime like that. So it could well be somebody who's not from this area. I mean, we don't know. We're open to any suggestions about this. So I did contact the local paper, and I said, this is maybe more a post for our Facebook page. I says, the only problem there is, although we have a good following and people share, I says, obviously it's still going to be far short of the kind of readership and the reach that they would have. But I says, I'm fine. If you think we should just keep it with Facebook, that's fine. So we decided just keep it for Facebook at the time. However, another one of the papers, the Daily Record, they've also over the years been helpful to us, particularly in recent years. I think the current reporter who speaks with us, I think he's actually either from Aberdeen or he used to work for one of the, like Aberdeen Live. So I contacted him and I said, look, would you be interested in this? He jumped at the chance and I was pleased that he did. So he put this out, no questions asked. I thought, is he going to want to speak with the guy? And in fairness, the guy very willingly says, look, if he wants to speak with me, won't reveal my identity, but I'll be happy to speak with him. But thankfully he didn't want to do that, or he didn't need to do it. So he put a good article in the Daily Record, which I think helped considerably, because it's amazing, Dawn. I mean, Dodd's case, yes, it's had extensive coverage in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, but I'm still amazed at the number of people I've spoken with who've never even heard of it. That's here, that's close to home. In Glasgow and Edinburgh, before we went to the police in 2015, I was kind of making some insights and inquiries into could we use like PIs on this, or would anybody be interested? Nobody had ever heard of the case, not a single person. So the Daily Record getting this out, it really helped coverage. I mean, it actually got it out there right across the Central Belt. So after I posted, I think we tried to get the post on the same day as it was going into the Record. It was actually either that same night or the day after that two guys came forward, two ex-prisoners, and then the next day another guy came forward. Now, I was so excited by this. I mean, they all didn't know each other. They all had their own names of who they thought, and they didn't just thought, they were like 110% convinced these people had killed Dodd. They'd always been convinced of this. Now, these are guys, tough guys, and not the ones to be conned into somebody saying, I killed that taxi driver. So they were pretty sure this was the case. So they gave us the names. I passed them on to the DI, and we were told, all those names, they had been done to them and they were all eliminated, so it wasn't any of them. So I got back to the three people. They were shocked. They were convinced. But more than that, the two things they had in common was, all of them said this from the start when they says, look, we're not interested in the money. It's not the money we're doing this for. But they says, we feel that after all this time, we've seen the family appeals. We feel that the family deserve closure and we don't want to take this to our graves with us. And I thought, that actually, it humbled me, and I actually was amazed at the empathy that they showed. These people were genuine. They firmly believed that these individual guys had killed Dodd. As I say, it wasn't them, none of them, and I got back and told them, and they were like, oh, I'm so sorry that, we bothered you. Well, they never bothered us. I mean, this is what we want, because one of these days, it will turn out to be the right name. But in particular, this is the corner of society. I think these people, even now, others will hold a lot of useful information. May not be the right name, but it could lead to the right name. So this is really who we want to reach. Everybody, but in particular these people, because we've never had any correspondence with them before. They've never contacted us before. I hope this is the start of it. And I'm sure they got the courage to do this from the guy who is still in touch with me. He said he's in it for life now. He's in it long term. He's not just going to abandon things. He's going to do whatever he can to continue to help us. And we will be forever grateful to him. Really nice guy. And he said, turned the corner. He says many years back, 30 years back, he says, basically saw the error of his ways. And as I say, grateful thanks to him. Seems such a really, really nice guy.
Just picking up on what Rubina said there, and I think it's exceptionally gratifying. Not just those people, every tip that we've had in, not one person has asked about the reward. Not a one. It's gratifying from a number of perspectives, because people have got good hearts and want to help get this solved. But it lets us know that it's somebody that is saying something that's true in their minds. It was true in their minds. They had been told that. And the other part to this that has been a bit of a surprise, I think, to both of us, how many people have said they've killed my uncle?
Of course.
We're not just talking about people it's a throwaway line. They've lived that life for a number of years, telling people, for what reason? Sometimes to intimidate people, like, look, I am absolutely capable of doing this, to basically scare some people for whatever, and they've scared their wife, they've scared their sons, their daughters. These are people that don't actually, they're hard men that didn't really need to do that, but yay.
That's what I find is most incredible. Their reputations speak for themselves.
Yeah, I know.
Yet they still feel the need to do this. I genuinely don't understand that. But yeah, it's amazing, John. I can't believe, I said to the DI a while back, is this common? And he says, not really, really, really common, but he says more so than you'd believe. The first time we heard someone, or we got a tip saying that so-and-so said they killed the taxi driver, I thought, quite naively, oh wow, this has got to be the person. Well, all these years on, no. Apparently, just about everybody in Aberdeen says they know somebody who's killed the taxi driver. But as I say, I don't mean to discourage people from coming in, because the police have to check each and every one out.
One of these days,
it'll be the right one.
So
you can't possibly afford to
no,
dismiss
I'm not saying that in any way, shape, or form to discourage people
No,
from
but
coming
it's
in.
just amazing how often it happens.
No, exactly. But no, you definitely don't want to discourage them coming forward. In fact, you mentioned in one of your posts that people can still get in touch with you if they want to remain anonymous, and they're not going to get into trouble either if they know information that they haven't passed on. Where do they stand if they were to get in touch?
Yeah, Dawn, the police said, because it was one of the first questions we asked the police in setting this up, they said, look, we're not interested on that, and they called it the greater good. So, look, if somebody's done something, they've been a burglar or something, and they know about it because they were doing a burglary with the person that was. Police aren't interested in any way, shape, or form about that. I'm calling it an ancillary thing. It's got nothing to do with the crime, nothing whatsoever. I know Rubina's posted that, and we will continue to tell them that no one is interested in that. Now, some people might, of course, say, "Oh, they're maybe just saying that," but no, I can absolutely swear to the fact that they would not be in any trouble from anything else that has got nothing to do with this murder.
And the current DI, James Callan, this is a while back, he says, in our opinion, he says, certainly in my opinion, and he says this would happen, a murder will always trump anything else. So he says, I don't care what they've done. He said, I don't care. But he says, up against a murder, if it's a case of, we'll get this guy or they'll give us extra information, nothing will happen to them, not a thing.
That's good. That's good to know. It's good to get that out there, because people might be frightened about that.
Absolutely. It's very important. I mean, I can understand people thinking, I either know who it is or I could give valuable information, but I'm scared to go forward in case they say, well, and also, other than, if they've done something, the person might feel the police will say, so why didn't you come forward before? So there might be that angle too, and they and we would just be happy if they would just come forward at all. I don't care how many years they've held this or whatever. Just come forward. Nobody's going to judge you or, look at you differently or whatever. We would just be more than happy to hear what you have to say. If it turns out not to be the correct information, well, that's fine. It's somebody else who's dismissed, and so it's all good.
Rubina and I will guarantee them anonymity if that's what they wish.
I am always checking this Facebook page, and I always like to make sure I get back to people. If they're good enough to contact us, I always like to make sure I get back to them, and also that they finally get answers from the police. Because there would be no use to me if somebody goes through the bother. I mean, people have their own lives to lead. We welcome, as Alex says, and we're grateful for their input, very grateful indeed. And without them, we wouldn't have any Facebook page. It's almost like their extended family. I often see the same names coming in with likes and shares, which is brilliant. So I kind of get to know these people a little bit better. They go out of their way to initiate conversations about this murder. Try and find out as much as they can. And as I say, we appreciate every single thing that everybody does for us.
Alec and Rubina really do value every single piece of information shared with them on their Facebook page. They will take everything that is shared with them seriously and pass on to the detective in charge of the case, DI James Callender, who in turn will either investigate or assure Alec and Rubina that line of inquiry was known about and had been dealt with. If the information Rubina receives turns out to be incorrect, she will then share this on Facebook so others know this information is incorrect too. For example, someone got in touch on the George Murdoch Murder Appeal Facebook page to inquire about a rumour that they'd heard about there having been a chicken kebab left in the back seat of George's taxi on the night of his murder. But I'll let Rubina tell you about that in her own words, while Alec shares a further long-standing rumour that has since been discovered to also be incorrect.
At the time, there were a lot of rumours about who it might be or the reason, whatever. We've had a few, not many, we've had a few come in, since we started the Facebook page. But I've been aware of them, and I've been able to explain, yes, we heard that too. That didn't work out, or wasn't them because of this, that, and the other. That one I'd never heard before, about the chicken kebab or something. And I think the chap said that a mate of his knew one of the police or something. And I thought, but irrespective, I would have passed this on to the DI. I did pass it on to him. And as soon as I told the DI this, he says, no, this definitely didn't happen. He says, and our officers wouldn't have gone to whatever, blah, blah, blah. So he says you can tell, that the person who called in that that's definitely not true. Obviously he'd heard this, and it was good of him because he could have been telling other people this maybe already had done. And again, that's something else that can be debunked, and if he never came forward, he or some of his friends might be thinking, well, but what about this? So he did them and us a favour because it stopped other people from thinking this or from hearing, if this and it wasn't true. But it also gave closure to others who had believed this or who had heard of this. But I had never heard of that one. That was a new one on me. The few others we'd heard, yes. Very seldom we get something coming in like that.
And the other one that was quite interesting, it was about the reporter, the senior crime and investigation reporter, Brian Rutherford. He uncovered something that was really interesting. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, at the time there was a brouhaha, I guess for want of better words, was that nobody came forward until about 6 weeks after the murder that someone in Mr. Chips, which was maybe about 2-3 miles away from where the murder occurred, someone had gone in there that night after the murder and had blood, cuts on his hand, face, blood, etc. But it wasn't reported for 6 weeks. Now, I never attached any significance to that story. But this is, again, Don, me putting myself in the murderer. I say, well, who would go in for a supper? But we're not the murderer, and seemingly they're so detached, and it is possible they could do that. Now, however, this guy, Brian Rutherford, the Press and Journal reporter, had spoken to, he said, I had gone into the chip shop the night before. He said, and he was catching hairs and skinning them, etc. And he had blood on his hands. He says, and I can't remember if he said he may well have cut his hands, etc. So he'd gone to Brian Rutherford. Poor man wasn't well. I'm not sure if he passed. But anyway, he was exonerated. It wasn't him, but the fact it was the night before, it almost seems like that was like, because police weren't made aware of that for 6 weeks. It probably was this guy that went in, but it was the previous night.
So it could have just been, that the dates were so close, but they were wrong. Or it could still have been, that somebody else had gone in the day after. But no, it definitely wasn't that particular guy. And it was good of him. He was actually terminally ill at the time. It was good of him to even, agree to speak to Brian Rutherford. So again, all thanks to him.
Alec and Rubina are always so appreciative for any tips or information they receive and will always pass them on to Detective James Callender. So if you have heard a rumour or have any information about this case, please contact Alec or Rubina on their Facebook page, George Murdoch Murder Inquiry, or email them at jdhallfield@mail.co.uk. These details will be in the show notes. Okay, so in the teaser in part 1, we heard Ryan say that it was announced by police that a DNA profile of George's murderer had been acquired, which is absolutely fantastic news. But there would be even more fantastic news to come. Let's hear from Ryan about those developments.
I interviewed a couple of the forensic scientists, forensic pathologists that work in the case, and the work these guys do is just phenomenal. It's just incredible. But they have worked in this DNA. They've never released where the DNA came from, whether it was from the cheese wire itself, I don't know. But there was an item there in the taxi or around George that they did extract DNA from. So in 2023, on the 40th anniversary of the murder, they made public that they have DNA of the killer, but that person isn't on the database. So without that person being arrested, and having a DNA sample taken, that's not going to help the police. So it's not as much as that was a significant lead. It's one piece of the jigsaw, but then they need to find out who that DNA belongs to. Without that identity, they won't know. But then from what I've read and from what I've seen since the podcast was released, they've managed to work on that DNA and develop that. And now what they have is they have a familial DNA, which means that basically the DNA sample they have now could be linked to a relative of his. And there was, at the time they said there was 200 possible genetic matches. So once they go through their database, they've done a public appeal. And also I think what's really important is that since the DNA has come out now, it means that if somebody out there thinks that their brother or their dad or their nephew or whoever, son was involved, they don't need now to go to the police and say, I think this person was involved, and think that will never be able to get proven or disproved. So that sample now means that if somebody does come forward and say, I think it was X or Y, the police can go to this DNA sample now and say, yes, it was, or no, it wasn't. So for somebody out there that might think they know who did it, there's now a way of 100% confirming whether they are correct or incorrect in their assumption. I think that must be a huge thing for somebody, because somebody doesn't want to go to the police and accuse somebody of this horrific crime if there's a chance that it might not be able to get proven or not. But now it can.
So they can just go themselves to the police and say, it could be my relative or such, my friend.
Yeah.
And they can get swabbed themselves.
Yeah.
If you consent to give a sample upon request of your DNA to the police, who are willing to travel the length and breadth of the country for this, if that sample leads to the police identifying George Murdoch's killer, then that person will receive £10,000 reward. However, there is also another reward of £50,000, which will be paid to anyone who comes forward with information that leads to the confirmed identity of George Murdoch's killer.
And do you know what? That's not the reason why somebody should do it. Somebody should do it because it's the right thing to do. But at the same time, let's be honest, it is an incentive. And hopefully that will continue to mean that the police get strong leads, because there is an incentive out there for somebody to really help the police to finally crack this case.
Let's find out a little bit more about the 200 people that police will initially be wanting to compare the DNA profile with, what stage they are at with this now, what the next steps are, and just how much it means to Alec and Rubina, as well as what it means for the case that the police now have George's killer's DNA profile.
To talk about the 200, Dawn, it's like everything, it's a slow process. And we can't thank the police enough for doing what they're doing. But if there's any live current murder inquiry, that's where the police resources will go to. So the cold case gets moved back, rightfully so. So then when the police have some time, they'll come back to do this. They've been very active in terms of that first, and I'm saying first tranche of 200 because it's not the last tranche of 200. So they'll go, they set parameters from the National Crime Database. Obviously, science is part of it. There'll be other parameters that they've set in there, age and all the other things that would go with that. But they've been out collecting that, and then it goes to the forensic scientist who's busy in the base case. Okay, it's not like they've been sitting waiting for this to come in and saying, oh, goody, I've got some work to do. It's like, oh, I'm overwhelmed. And they're really busy. So that just adds to the time lapse of everything that goes on. But once they get through that 200, Dawn, and there's been no hits, that's not the end of it. There's other, and I don't know the number. The police have been brilliant sharing information with us, but they won't share everything with us, and that's absolutely quite right. We accept that. They do keep us up to date with certain things, but they've obviously got to be very guarded in terms of what they're telling even us, even though I think we've built up a great relationship with them. So they have to kind of not tell us everything. So at any given time, if we're speaking to D.I. James Callender, he couldn't say to us, because I would ask, and he wouldn't answer, but I would say, okay, of the 200, how many have you got so far? Is it 170, 180? No, you won't get into that kind of detail. It just takes a little bit of time in terms of that. And I was going to say time is one thing we have, but of course we don't. Rabin and I aren't spring chickens anymore. And I've said it before, Tom, we're the last generation that really cares, that knew them enough to care, Dodd and Jesse. We'll continue this for as long as we possibly can. But when we're gone, the police will still continue it, but there'll come a time, I think, the law of diminishing returns will set in when you've just exhausted everything. But the good thing is about having the DNA, and this is one thing that's pleased me no end about the police being able to get that. If they didn't have this, and someone came forward and said it's person X, well, without having the DNA, that would never, ever have got to court. Because it'd be one person's word, and it's one person's word about something that happened 40 plus years ago. It would never stack up. So you'd never be able to tell. But now you can definitively say, yeah, no, it is this person because the DNA doesn't lie. So that's been real helpful. And obviously getting the DNA to an extent that it can do familial is very, very, very helpful.
Now, we've heard throughout this episode and part 1 a number of theories about what type of person George's killer could have been. And the psychologist Ryan spoke to for his podcast, Who is the Cheesewire Killer, had another one. But so do Rabina, Alec, and both the former detective who worked on the case and the current lead detective. And it just so happens that they all have the same belief.
On Ryan's podcast, he interviewed a psychologist, and her theory was that strangulation usually involves people who want ultimate control. It's a controlling kind of form of killing somebody. People who want to exert control. And she says the killer may have been thinking, I'm not going to let this guy, his victim, get the better of me. So I'm going to silence him at all costs. Now, I'm not sure. I can understand her saying that. In Dodd's case, I don't think by this time Dodd would have been putting up any resistance at all. Plus the fact, and I'm not sure if this has got out much, Jessie, his wife, Dodd's wife, she never was keen on him taking up taxiing anyway. She always thought it could lead to problems, so he could be attacked or whatever. And poor Jessie was always terrified that he might be attacked. She was particularly wary and scared about this when he was on night shift, which of course he was that particular night. But Dodd always said to her, look, Jess, don't worry about this. If somebody tries to rob me or whatever, I'll just tell them, look, take the money. Just take the money and go. So it's not like Dodd would have put up resistance if the guy had said to him, I want your money. I can't imagine he would say that because instantly that would put Dodd on alert. I think he just put this wire around his neck without any warning whatsoever. But irrespective, if he had said that, Dodd would have said, okay, here's the money, go. So it's so sad because what Jessie always was terrified would happen, well, she didn't expect him to be killed, but absolutely ended up being the case,
I think it was James Callender, way back, he felt this will be solved by science. He also said, and so did Gary Winter, they felt that the person's probably somewhere. If you go into their 10,000 statements and interviews, they said it's probably somebody that's in there. Because at that time, of course, no DNA, no CCTV, nothing. All you had was going and interviewing somebody, and if they had a valid alibi or decent alibi, based on what you thought, came across as being somebody that was quite open, etc. Case closed in terms of that person, they're not looked at again. Even if you go back to the Yorkshire Ripper, and I don't know how many times he was interviewed by the police, and then, of course, it ended up being him. So they've always thought it's probably somebody in there. And it might be. I think there's maybe a good chance, maybe 90% chance, but there's also that 10% chance it was just somebody in Aberdeen at that time and fled pretty quickly to somewhere else.
The police at the time did, I think it was 10,000 house-to-house calls. They collated 8,000 witness statements. There are boxes and boxes and files. And this is one thing that really stood out to me too when I interviewed Alex, Dodd's nephew, is that he firmly believes in one of those witness statements is the key that could solve this case. It's just extracting that piece, and the case has moved forward. There are several leads the police are looking at, and that's the leads that they've made public. Who knows what other leads they have actually currently, because they don't release everything straight away. They kind of exhaust all avenues. They go through a process of elimination, and only once they've carried that out, they then make that public to try and open that out to a wider community and to the wider audience. So there could be things, and I have absolutely no inside knowledge of what's happened now in the case. I never have had inside knowledge of what's going on within the case. That's not in the public domain, but I really hope there is something strong there that they are currently investigating that will lead to the discovery of Dodd's killer.
Robina and Alec have received many tips through their Facebook page, all of which do get passed on to the lead detective and followed up and eliminated. But I wondered just how receiving these tips makes Alec and Robina feel.
You know, the initial reaction is always a little bit of elation that this might be the person.
Yeah.
And that sometimes ebbs away slowly when more information comes in. And so over time, you kind of get a little less enthusiastic about that. And as I mentioned earlier, there have been a number of tips, and you kind of have a lot of highs and lows with it. You're able to compartmentalize it as we've been able to do. This is a 10th year of this. Now, we didn't expect quick results, but I think in our hearts and our heads, we thought it would have been solved before this time. That doesn't mean to say that we're knocked back, etc., because the one big tip is just around the corner. And Don, the fact that you're doing this and the reach that you have, the newspapers, the television media, the radio, etc., it just takes one person. And going back to all the tips, Robina mentioned the 200 tips from that 2018 media blitz. That came from all over the world. And so sometimes somebody is sitting at their keyboard, they're fed up, I don't know where they are, they're in Darwin, Australia or something like that, and they're hankering of home in Scotland because they were in Aberdeen at that time, maybe come from Aberdeen, and they come across this Facebook appeals page, or they come across something about the murder and say, oh, I remember that, and I remember this, and I remember this person, etc. Bang, a tip comes in, and it just, one of these days, it just might be the right tip.
I think as well, we were obviously never done this before, thankfully, but we were probably naive. We didn't know what to expect, which was why the first couple of times when we hear, oh, somebody said they'd killed, the taxi driver, you tended to pretty much believe it, at least I did. And then, as I say, the more often you get these reports coming in, you're instantly a bit suspect, not from the person who calls it in, but as to how this will turn out. So you kind of temper your
you don't get your hopes
more.
up. You don't get your hopes up so much. Yeah.
And basically, so when I pass this on to the DI, I'm kind of waiting for him to come back and say, yeah, they've been eliminated, which has happened so much, or we still need to trace this person. My initial reaction now is never, I bet they're going to come back and say, this is him. I hope that will be the case, and one day it will, but that's not my reaction now. Whereas when this first started, it was always, I'm waiting and I'm kind of chasing him up and saying, have you heard anything yet? So it's a natural progression that you go from being on those highs to well, hopefully it's going to be him, but I don't expect it will be, because it would be too good if it was. So yeah, it's good actually, because for me anyway, I don't know how you're not in this constant high-low kind of thing, you kind of even out, and you think, let's hope.
Yeah.
So it's good. It is good.
But the one thing is, and I hope it comes across, we're not jaded.
Oh, no.
We're absolutely not. The hope springs eternal, and we're 10 years into it. We're still there fighting.
In fact,
for
the longer it goes on, the more intense I get.
Yeah.
Like the psychologist whom I referred to with Ryan said that the guy, it was like, his attitude was, this person, Dodd, isn't going to get the better of me. Well, that's exactly how I feel with this. This depraved, sick individual, he's not going to get the better of us. Whether he's dead or not, it doesn't matter. With familial DNA now, the police can still, hopefully, if we get a name, the guy's dead, they can still hopefully trace who it is. A name would do it for me, because if we got a name and the guy had died, so there would be no court case or whatever, that would be suffice for me. I mean, we'll have to be realistic. We'll be 42 years in September. Yeah, there's a chance that he could have died, and particularly if he led a depraved sort of life. But that's okay. I'm not bothered about that. So whether there's a court case or not, so long as we get a name, all this will be worth it for me, as far as I'm concerned. And I've always felt that. I remember telling Gary Winter that at the start, and I think he looked at me like I was crazy, but a name will do it. And that for me would give Dodd some justice.
While there have been many appeals over the years for information into who killed George Murdoch, something that Alex and Robina think about is how they would feel and what they would do if they had suspicions that someone they knew or loved could perhaps be a murderer. Moral dilemma or easy decision? What would you do?
I think it's quite interesting, because we're often appealing to somebody to come forward. And I definitely believe somebody else knows, other than the killer, who it was. And it's kind of a moral dilemma. And I say to myself, well, look, if it was my brother that did it and I knew, would I come forward? And the honest answer is, and I think it would be the honest answer for most people, is either they wouldn't or they don't know how they would react. I think the person would say, yeah, I absolutely would come forward. Well, they might if they hated their brother or son, or etc. But I think most people probably wouldn't. But Robina mentioned the killer may well be dead now. And I think that changes things. Now, all they're doing by not coming forward is protecting the memory of their individual, their brother or what have you, or whoever. They're only protecting their memory. And I think at that time, bit like Robina mentioned, some of these previous people that had been in prison, that they felt they didn't want to take it to their grave. And I would hope that somebody, and I would hope I would have the courage, if it was somebody in my family, to do that as well. But it is a moral dilemma, because I don't know if many people would.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. I'm probably the same. I mean, if it was my dad, whom I was exceptionally close to, I'm not sure how I'd feel about that. I do think it would alter how you looked at that person again. And if it was strong enough, or if you were disgusted enough with the act, maybe they would find it in their heart to come forward. But I understand their loyalty, and I think they need to be commended. But we need to make the distinction here. This guy, he didn't just break into a shop or whatever. He actually killed another human being. He took Jessie's life, her husband, away. He didn't just kill Dodd, he actually killed the life Jessie had with her husband too. He's affected both people here. Now, if he has any sense of care, sympathy, whatever, or the person who knows who did this, that might be suffice for them. But going out with that family, going out with that close tie, maybe a neighbour who has always held high suspicions that it could have been the guy next door or the father next door, whatever. These are the people we would appeal to come forward, because they don't have that same loyalty. So forget about the close family. Yes, it's difficult to break that tie, but maybe not so difficult for a neighbour, for
friend,
the milkman, a friend who has, high suspicion. So do come forward. Nobody will ever know who came forward. Nobody. Absolutely not. I mean, that's 100% correct. But you could just be doing us a favour here. It could turn out to be the person you've always suspected. And if it doesn't, well, that's kind of like a load lifted off you as well. There's nothing worse than thinking it could be somebody you know, and you've held this all these years. So it's a release for them too. So there's other ways of looking at it.
I think for myself, just I think it would be an awful burden for a person just thinking if it was my family member, and it's the case it's out there now, it's kind of everywhere now, and you're seeing that, and it would be a heavy load on my shoulders. You'd always have this balancing act. I think it would ruin your life.
Always have it. And I remember a few things I read about years back. It can affect your health. You know this because it's always there. And as you say, the cases everywhere, you know, I mean, you don't know when you're going to see something in the paper again. I often wonder how these people who are holding this individual close to their heart, who are so loyal to him, how they felt, first of all, when the DNA announcement came. I mean, that must have been a huge blow to think that, you know, he's never going to be discovered now. And suddenly they've got DNA. And then now with the familial, which the police say has a 1 in 4 chance of being successful, I used to say to the DI, well, yeah, so what, 1 in 4. And he says, that's pretty high odds though, Rabina. He says, you know, it's, we're not speaking like, you know,
needle in a haystack.
Yeah, he says that's pretty good. And the police have been going all over the UK. I mean, you know, from top to bottom of the British Isles. They're not just going within Aberdeen, whatever, all over. So who knows? You know, at least it's better than not having anything at all to go with. So if that person out there won't come forward when they could claim the 50,000, if it doesn't matter if it's of interest to them or not, they would get the money irrespective. So they could come forward and get the money, or if they don't, it'll be solved by science and they won't get anything. That's their choice to make.
You have to bring it back to George and Jesse. George was 58, Jesse was 56 at the time, and George was taken away from his wife. His wife made a widow, and she never ever recovered. She suffered ill health after that because I think she basically, unfortunately, died of a broken heart. And that's what you have to remember too, is that there's two people here. Their lives were ruined, and all the people, the family around them, George's nephew, niece, the other family members, his neighbour. George and Jesse made such an impact on so many people's lives, and no one deserves what happened to them. But for a couple like that, I think it just makes it slightly more sadder, if it possibly can. And maybe that sounds insensitive to other people that have lost somebody in this terrible circumstances, but so sad. If anybody out there has any idea who did this, I cannot say this strong enough. Please get in touch with Police Scotland. Do the right thing. You can do that anonymously, or have a look at the George Murdoch Facebook page. Just go into Facebook, search George Murdoch. You can contact the family through the Facebook page, and there's an email address there too that people can email. And every single lead, every single email is taken seriously. Because it has to, because it just takes one piece of information that can finally unlock the truth. Hopefully we will get justice soon.
If you have any information at all, have heard a rumour, have a theory, or have always had a feeling that someone you know may have been involved with George Murdoch's murder, please contact Rabina and Alec, anonymously or otherwise, by visiting the George Murdoch Murder Appeal Facebook page, or by emailing jdhallfield@mail.co.uk, or contact Police Scotland on 101. Even if you don't know anything, Alec and Rabina would be so grateful if you visited the Facebook page and shared their posts. The more we talk about and share the details of George Murdoch's murder, the more chance there is that this story will reach just the person who holds the key piece of information, or has a name of a person they have long thought to be involved. You can find out more about George and his wife Jessie by reading The Last Fair, written by Rabina Mackay, by listening to and sharing Ryan's podcast, Who is the Cheesewire Killer, or by regularly visiting and sharing Rabina's posts on the George Murdoch Murder Appeal Facebook page. All links will be in the show notes. Thank you for listening, sharing, and helping to keep 58-year-old George Murdoch's murder in the public eye. Here's final thoughts from Alec and Rabina.
Any tip that they have, even if they think it's totally absurd and they think they're wasting our time, because it just might be a little sliver of information that really helps the police. I've always kind of just described it as like, this is a bunch of dots, but none of us can see how they join up. But that might just be the one piece that helps us join up all the dots. So if they have any inkling in terms of who they think it might be, any bits of information on somebody, that somebody might have said something, even though it might have came like about from 5 stages away, that a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend had heard this, so it's a rumour, etc. But come forward with it, because that could be just the thing that helps us solve the case.
There is still an awful lot of information out there. It's trying to find that button to encourage people to come forward. Don't think, oh, this is nothing in the interest of them. It might just be. Don't be hesitant to come forward. It doesn't matter. It might sound silly to you. It might sound like it's nothing. It could actually turn out to be the one thing we're waiting for. We've been waiting for all these years. So don't worry about that. Please come forward. You'll always be treated respectfully. I guarantee you'll get answers. We'll get back to you. And if you want any anonymity, no questions asked. We don't care your reasons for it. We will absolutely 100% guarantee it. It only will be between us, nobody else. It'll be treated in strictest confidence. We really, really would appeal to you. If you take it to yourself, if you were in our situation, hopefully you never will be and never have been. But how would you feel, if you've got this long murder case which hasn't been solved, you would want to get it solved for that person. Dodd can't rest in peace. We're his last hope. So we will just continue on. Nothing will dissuade us. And as I say, no matter how many disappointments, whatever, we're just going to hang in there. I will never give up. If ever there comes a time when the police say, look, we've done all we can, there isn't much more we can do, well, I'll think of something to do. Somehow or other, I can't let this go. Will we never get a resolution? I think we will, to be honest, but we may not. And it doesn't matter either way. We will keep going. Both of us will keep going.
Scottish Murders is a production of Clurinton.